But it's mercifully brief. And then what's really most interesting to me, and I hope for you as well, is a conversation about whatever's on your minds, questions that you might have about Episcopal Relief and Development and our work worldwide. For those of you who don't know, it's right in our name, but Episcopal Relief and Development is the global relief and development agency for the Episcopal Church. We are yours. We belong to the Episcopal Church, and we do your work on your behalf all around the world. For those of us who've been around the Episcopal Church for a while, and remember, as I do, the Presiding Bishops Fund for World Relief, we are the descendant organization from the Presiding Bishops Fund for World Relief. The name was changed in the year 2000, and we became a separate nonprofit organization in 2000, a separate 501c3. We have our own board of directors. We are accountable to the church, but we govern ourselves. We raise all of our own funds from wonderful people like you. We are supported not just within the Episcopal Church, but also beyond the Episcopal Church. We have foundations that support us, international multilateral organizations, various UN agencies support us. So we're supported not just by the Episcopal Church, but by the broader funding community for international relief and development. We provide relief in times of disaster and promote sustainable development by addressing the root causes of suffering. We work primarily, but not exclusively, with church partners throughout the Anglican Communion, but we also work with ecumenical bodies and other faith groups, and those who share a common vision for peace and justice among all people. Our biblical inspiration comes from Matthew 25. Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. We are focused on advancing lasting change in communities affected by injustice, poverty, disaster, and climate change. Each year, we reach over, I just got the numbers for 2025, we're in 2025, so 2024, about 4.1 million people, focused on 4 interconnected priorities. Nurturing the potential of caregivers and young children through our integrated early childhood development work, reducing violence against women and girls, strengthening communities and helping them become more resilient to climate change, and then, of course, facilitating response to humanitarian disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, the war in Ukraine, for example, which this parish has been particularly generous in supporting our work there. Together with our partners, we leverage what's working well to drive impact, learning, and sustainability. We have a brief video here, which we will show, which gives you the sort of the 30,000-foot look at our work, and then I want to open it up to conversation after that. Please.
For over 80 years, Episcopal Relief and Development has been working together with a global network of partners to advance lasting change in communities affected by injustice, poverty, disaster, and climate change. Working together for lasting change starts with a deep respect for the dignity of all people. It starts with recognizing a community's unique assets and resources, listening to all voices, building on existing strengths, and creating solutions that are locally led, community-owned, and sustainable. Working together for lasting change means equipping and supporting parents and caregivers to provide nurturing care, especially during the critical first 1,000 days of life, ensuring children reach their full potential. It means partnering with Christian and Muslim faith leaders to confront harmful social norms, prevent and respond to gender-based violence, and promote and advance gender equality. Working together for lasting change means investing in communities most at risk of devastating droughts and floods, fostering resilience, and providing the training and resources needed to recover and adapt. It means working through global networks, like the Anglican Communion, to respond to disasters and conflicts, accompanying people as they seek housing, employment, and critical support services. At Episcopal Relief and Development, we know that working together leads to sustainable solutions and thriving communities. Will you join us in advancing lasting change?
You know, I often get asked in these settings, with so many wonderful organizations doing work all over the world, what makes Episcopal Relief and Development different from the many other great organizations doing relief and development? And I like to cite three things. The first is a philosophy that we have embedded in our work called asset-based community development. It's easy to remember. Asset, A-B-C-D, asset-based community development. And this is based on the philosophy of appreciative inquiry. Many organizations, when they come into communities, do what's called a needs assessment or a needs gap. What are the problems that you're facing? What are the things that are missing in this community? And while that's certainly important, we start with what are the resources that you have in this community, and what do you want to achieve with them? How do you want to mobilize what's available in your community to bring about lasting change? And the benefit of this methodology is that it embeds the change in the local community. Certainly, we bring technical assistance, we provide financial support, but only as the last step in a process that engages the entire community in identifying and discerning for themselves what is the vision of a better future that they'd like to have for themselves. And the result of this, of course, is that when Episcopal Relief and Development has to move on, as we invariably do, the change that we've embedded in the community sustains itself and does not require long-term continued engagement by us. And this is one of the things I think that it really distinguishes us from a lot of the other work that's going on in this space. And the second thing, and this sounds a little funny to say, but evidence-based programming. You know, we continually monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of all of our programs. When I first started at Episcopal Relief and Development, faith-based relief and development was kind of seen as an adjunct to the big relief and development industrial complex. We were seen as, we're nice people, we're church people, we do the right thing, but, you know, we're not really serious about this work. And that's just not true. But what we needed to do, and what we have done at Episcopal Relief and Development, is invest very heavily in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, so that we're able to document the change and show the change that we bring about as a result of the work that we're doing. One of the things that's really exciting is that we've also been able to begin to document the value add of faith-driven development. And this kind of brings me to the third point that I want to make, which is the other thing that distinguishes Episcopal Relief and Development is all of you and the part that we play as a church in this work. You know, when I travel around the world to go and visit our programs, I get on the airplane and I fly 12 hours, and then I drive for another 16 hours to the village, and then I get in a boat and I take the boat down the river and I walk another, 6 hours. And often, the only thing I find in the communities that we're visiting that has any link to the outside world is a house of worship. It's either a church, it's a mosque, it's whatever the local community's primary faith is, or sometimes multiple faiths. And instead of creating our own infrastructure, which is what a lot of global NGOs do, we leverage what's already there. We look at the capacity that that community has to do ministry in its own community, and we try to strengthen it. Very much the way your church does local work here in Seattle, right? The same is true in small little village communities in the savannah in Africa. They are working to try and make their communities better. And so we strengthen and build that. And one of the things that we can call on is our global relationships through the Anglican Communion worldwide. But we're not limited to that. You know, we're very open, and we do in fact work with other faith groups. In Liberia, for example, we work very closely with the Muslim community on reducing gender-based violence against women. We work with ecumenical bodies. We work on an interfaith basis. But by working through faith communities, we're able to ensure that we bring about lasting change. And those are the three things, I think, that really distinguish us from other global NGOs, and I think give us a kind of secret sauce, if you will, although I don't love that expression, that allows us to really deliver impact and sustain that impact over the long term. So that's the part of my presentation that I was obliged to give to all of you. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on your mind. Yes, sir.
Two related questions, if I may.
Of course.
One is, how much roughly is your annual budget? Where does it come from?
Mm-hmm.
And two, probably have seen what we do locally here with, or have a heart fundraiser and what we fund, or have you seen it?
I'm sort of generally aware of it, but tell me more.
I'm just curious as to what kind of overlaps there are and what could we be, I don't
Can't hear you because you're so diminutive.
So what, are there overlaps? Do we do things you're doing and maybe
Okay.
we don't need to do as much of because you're doing, or things like that?
Great question. So the first question on the size of the annual budget of Episcopal Relief and Development. We just did a budget revision on Friday, and our annual budget projection for 2025 is about $35 million a year. And most of that, it fluctuates a little bit. Some of that is driven by what disasters are we responding to. So God willing, there are fewer disasters, our budget will go down. But in general, it fluctuates between $32 and $35 million a year. I would say currently about 60% of that comes from individuals like you, people who are sitting in churches around the Episcopal Church. So people are extremely generous. I don't know, Jim, how many people do we have on our donor list? Active donors are probably about 30,000 active donors a year. Yeah, we probably have many more in our donor list, but not everybody gives to us every year. And some people are motivated only to respond to disasters. So if there's a major disaster, they would step up. The other 40% of that comes from foundations, or like the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, for example, has been a major supporter of ours for many, many years on our work to do integrated early childhood development. Islamic Relief USA has funded a lot of our work on reducing violence against women and girls, the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Of course, your local outfit, the Gates Foundation, although they are not currently funding us, have funded us in the past, and I would expect them to fund us in the future. So the rest of it, that other 40%, fluctuates, but it's primarily foundations. With respect to what we do here in the United States, the only programs we do here in the United States are respond to disasters, and that was part of the original mandate that was set up when we were established as a separate 501c3, precisely because local churches like yours are already doing the kind of work that you're doing. We don't want to duplicate or interfere in your ability to do that work. However, when there are disasters, we leverage local parish ministries. Give you an example. The wildfires in California earlier this year. One of the big issues that happened was that food pantries, many churches had food pantries ran out of food. So we resupplied the food pantries. We were able to leverage money, give them a grant so that they could resupply and do their own food pantry work. So that's how we work with local parish ministries here in the United States during times of disaster. You had a question, sir?
We have a lot of international stuff too, that's what I was really getting at.
Epiphany, in terms of, I know you make gifts to Episcopal Relief and Development. Is that what you're referring to?
No. American Friends in the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem.
Sure, yep. Well, the American Friends are a good partner for us. We work very closely with the American Friends, particularly on what's happening right now in the West Bank and in Gaza. We've all funded the diocese in Jerusalem for their work with the Ali Arab Hospital, for example. So we collaborate very closely with the American Friends. Haiti, we're on the sidelines at the moment. Haiti is a complicated place, and we have been very engaged in Haiti. We've kind of stepped back from Haiti at the moment.
Do you think the Episcopal Church overall, in the presiding bishop's office, I suppose, is thinking about how they can do more in Haiti, since that is part of our diocese?
Yeah, it's part of our church.
Our church.
So this is a new presiding bishop, so I have not had an extended conversation with him specifically about Haiti. They're currently without a bishop in Haiti, which makes it a complicated situation. And I think the hope is eventually to stabilize the diocese and have a bishop's election so that we're able to partner more effectively. That's one of the reasons we're on the sidelines. Our primary partners are usually the diocese. We have worked with some non-church NGOs in Haiti in times of disaster, but in terms of long-term commitment to Haiti or development agenda in Haiti, we've been more on the sidelines, as has the church in general.
No, I know. We work with Joseph Constant. I don't know if you know Joseph in the Haiti
Sure.
Micah Project.
Yep.
So we do a lot of work through them. That is a complicated
Very complicated
deal.
place, yes.
Complicated things happen with the church down there, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Your statement about using the local infrastructure, I like that. I thought that was very interesting. And then I was picturing, how do you, there is a lot of Episcopalianism in what you do in Christianity. How do you square the use and the outreach within a mosque and their teachings?
Sure.
I like the idea of cross.
Yeah, yeah.
But how do you do that? So you go into a mosque, are you
So,
teaching?
so let me give you
Christianity?
a sort of a real-life example of how this worked out. When we launched our work to reduce violence against women in Liberia, we worked initially only with Christian organizations. That, not because we didn't want to work with Muslim organizations, but because that was where our natural network was. And so I did a program visit there about 5 years ago. And as I do, I was sitting under the tree with the local community and asking for feedback about what they thought about this program. The women said, we love the program. We think it does great things. We're really glad that you've worked with our clergy. But we were at the market, and our Muslim sisters want you to come and teach the imams about this stuff so that the Muslim community, the Muslim clergy, have access to this. And I went back and I thought, that's a really interesting idea. I like that idea. So I talked with my friend, who was then the head of Islamic Relief USA here in the States, and I said, do you think this is something that you guys would like to partner with us on? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So what we've done is we worked with our Muslim peer agency and their networks in Liberia to create an interfaith initiative on reducing violence against women and girls and adapting our curriculum and our teaching materials to the Muslim faith. So we're not using Christian Bible verses, we're using verses out of the Quran and being flexible about that. Just sort of paying attention to what works, right? And evidence-based, but also not with no preconception about how this has to happen, right? We want the outcome. We want the outcome, and what is the most practical and effective way over the long term to reach that outcome? So that's kind of the approach that we take. And it's not just I was in Liberia a year ago, and certainly we work with Christians and Muslims, and it's all flavors of Christianity, from the Pentecostals to evangelicals, Muslims, but also local faith traditions, right? The local faith leaders who may not fit into our conception of the Muslim-Christian baskets. They're leading local religions. But if you don't have them on your side, you're not going to get anywhere, right? They're going to undermine the long-term message. So, we're very open to working with whoever wants to work with us, basically. Yes?
How do you decide who you're going to help?
How do we decide who we're going to help?
Do people contact you and say, we need help in this area, or does the local church contact you, or how exactly does that work?
Great question. Our partners are primarily, well, not exclusively, primarily our counterpart Anglican agencies. So, for example, in Zambia, the Zambian Anglican Church has something called the Zambian Anglican Outreach Program, and we have partnered with them for over 20 years. So we have a long relationship with them. And when we were developing our current strategic priorities of women, children, climate, and obviously responding to disasters, we didn't just think that up in New York. We spent a lot of time talking to our partners all over the world, and we're active now in 53 countries. And we did a really strong consultative process saying, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? What are the things that are the priorities for the communities where you're present? And that was a big conversation, and it got sort of boiled down to these 4 priorities. It's up to the local church to the local Anglican Council or the local diocesan outreach program, whatever it is, who happens to be our partner, to identify the specific communities where they're going to work, right? They're going to work in Village A, but not Village B, and they have their various reasons for making various priorities out of those things. And we defer to them. I mean, they're the closest to the situation. The only thing that we ask is that the programs focus on the most vulnerable, right? So we need, for example, with our early childhood development program, we ask them to put a heavy emphasis on children who are in families that have been affected by HIV/AIDS in some way, because often those are single-parented families, or there are no parents and the children are being raised by an older sibling, so particularly vulnerable families. And again, faith communities are best placed to identify who those folks are. That's primarily how we go about doing it. Sure.
Could you be specific in Ukraine, what you're doing there?
Sure. Our work on the Ukraine crisis falls into kind of two basic baskets. The first is what's going on in Ukraine, dealing with internally displaced people who have fled out of the war zones and are now spread within Ukraine. We work with an ecumenical partner there. It's called Action of Churches Together, ACT, Action of Churches Together, which is part of the World Council of Churches. It's the Geneva-based World Council of Churches. So we're working with local church partners. I think primarily the Hungarians church at the moment is leading the effort there. So we're supporting the work that they're doing, providing food, helping with shelter, helping people get access to medical care, that kind of. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is working with displaced Ukrainians who have come into Western Europe. So in that case, we're working primarily with the convocation of Episcopal churches in Europe. There are, 20 Episcopal churches that are, American Episcopal churches that are organized into the convocation. Their main refugee outreach is based in the St. Paul's Within the Walls in Rome, which I visited about 3 years ago. So that's helping with language, skills acquisition, being sure kids are getting education, this kind of stuff, helping the local church communities where the refugees show up, making sure that they can get access to the kind of social services that they're entitled to through various European Union services. It's interesting with the Ukrainians, if I can digress a little bit, in Europe, because most of them, their intention is not to settle in Europe. Their intention is to return to Ukraine. So in some case, in traditional, and it had often been the case with refugee communities that it's about trying to get them to integrate into the local community, get your kids into the school, help them learn Italian or French or whatever. The Ukrainians have kind of decided that's not, at least in the near term, what they want to do. They want to return to the Ukraine, which is completely understandable. And moreover, the Ukrainian government has created an entire online education system for Ukrainian children in Europe. So in our case, that means making sure they have access to the internet, that they have the right kind of computing support so that they can stay integrated into the Ukrainian education system. So with families with children go back, because most of them are young children and women. Husbands and boyfriends and partners have stayed in Ukraine to fight the war. So the intention is not finally to settle in Europe. So it's an interesting kind of situation with the Ukrainians.
Yeah, our relationship with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church goes back a long time, over 70 years. They worship here at Epiphany.
Ah, okay.
The Holy Trinity, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, is worshiping in a couple of minutes, 11 o'clock. So we have a deep relationship with them over time as communities of faith on one campus. So
Yeah,
that's part of it.
let's see some questions here.
Yeah, this is the opposite of the how do you decide who to help? How do you decide when to stop helping? You mentioned something about moving on. So
Yeah.
when is it time to move on? How do you prepare a community when you're going to move on?
Yeah, the best example of that, I think, is probably in our early childhood development program, where we have done various cycles. We work primarily with children in the 0 to 3 cohort. And the first cycle is about helping the caregivers with community promoters, health promoters, helping the caregivers learn things about nutrition, vaccination schedules, play, all kinds of basic early childhood development stuff, sort of in a one-on-one relationship. So that's cycle 1. Cycle 2 is to take those same caregivers and have them be the teachers to their neighbors, right? So bring them together into a community and do the education at a less of a retail, more of a wholesale level with the local community of caregivers. And then when they're ready to say, and it often just happens naturally, they get to the point, they said, you know what, I took what I learned here and I was telling my neighbors about it. Or my neighbors heard about it and they want to learn more about it. So when it kind of tips into, it's become locally embedded in the community, and the local leadership of the community, the local families, the local early childhood development community is ready to lead it for themselves, then we step out. We continue to stay in touch because we want access to the monitoring and evaluation data. We want to be sure that we're having the program continues to have the impact. So it's a heavy engagement that kind of plateaus, and then we begin to step back as the local community. The best practices are embedded in the local community, and the same would be true for any of the other areas where we work.
Back here, and then we'll go forward.
You told us that you had found more sustainability in your projects where there are faith institutions, and I'm wondering how you measure that. And secondly, you told us that, well, I'm forgetting my second question, but thank you.
So how do you measure the sustainability? There are longitudinal studies that can compare the work that we do against the work that another NGO might do in the same space. This is particularly true in the early childhood development work, and this is one of the things that the Hilton Foundation has been very interested in, is to compare faith-led early childhood development initiatives with more secularly, using the same methodologies, but more secularly led programs. And the data is emerging that it's stickier in the communities if the faith community is in the lead with this. Same is true, with reducing violence against women and girls. We did a study with a program out of Stellenbosch University. I should have mentioned that we always use third-party evaluators on our work, so we're always using an external evaluator. In the case of early childhood development work, it was a major Kenyan think tank that works on children's survival issues. With our gender-based violence work, it was it was at Stellenbosch University. I'm forgetting the name of the institute, but affiliated with Stellenbosch University. But one of the things that I found when we first began to make waves in this space was I would encounter, not surprisingly, in the more secularly oriented organizations that, you can't really involve the church or Muslim clergy in reducing gender-based violence. They're part of the problem. They're perpetuating bad stereotypes, bad cultural practices, FGM, all sorts of that kind of stuff. And I said, yeah, that's probably true. And if you want to change it, whose minds do you think you need to change? Right? You need to get the clergy on board, because the clergy are the ones that are setting the norms in these communities. And they just didn't want to engage with faith. Right? There was kind of an allergicness to it. Most people weren't faith literate. They didn't understand how faith works in people's lives. So it was really sort of, that's changing because as I've said, we've had a couple of studies that have done on it and that we've done on it, and the more sustainable programs to reduce violence against women and girls engage the clergy in that work.
I have a question about trends. So if you look back over the last 10 years, what do you see? Have the needs changed? And if you had to look forward, where do you see the greatest need?
Ooh, boy. So the last 10 years, as Deutsch said, I've been in this role now for 20 years, which is sort of shocking for me to say. But anyway, so the last 10 years, I would say, when I first there was a lot of siloed work going on. Deutsch mentioned the Nets for Life campaign, for example. There was a huge effort put into malaria prevention, and rightly so. Malaria was the largest killer of children under 5. I mean, it was huge. And it wasn't addressing the other needs of the communities. So one of the reasons we kind of wound down Nets for Life was that we were meeting communities that were saying, we love it, we're very grateful for the nets, And we need better nutrition, and we need access to vaccinations, and we need these, now that you've saved my child's life, we need all this other stuff. So there's been a trend towards more integration, all right? That's why we call it integrated early childhood development and not malaria prevention, although malaria prevention and malaria nets are certainly a big part of it. But we took the infrastructure that we built for the malaria net distributions and developed it into this much more integrated early childhood development work. So that would be what I would say has been the major trend, and we're not alone in that. Most of the big NGOs that you'll talk to who work in this space, when they're talking to each other, we talk about integrated. When we're talking publicly, people still, like to think in very segmented ways, right? I only want to build a well. Okay, well, the well actually has an impact on girls' education, right? I mean, the well is both a solution and a symptom of a bigger problem. So we think about it in a more integrated way. And some of that has to do, just to be completely transparent, with how we raise money, right? There are a lot of people who are very committed to the idea that $15 buys a net and saves a life. And that is absolutely true. And the more complicated, long-term, sustainable change comes through an integrated program. So that's looking back. Looking forward, we're in unprecedented times. You all are sure aware of what's happened to USAID. And the collapse and it's not just in the United States, although here it's been the most drastic. Most of the big developing countries have reduced their international development budgets. The Europeans have, the British have. We've, for all intents and purposes, eliminated it. We're already feeling the impact of that on our work. Episcopal Relief and Development has not recently taken any, it's not that we're opposed to it, but we don't currently or didn't have any US grants. So when USAID cut up their grants, we didn't have an immediate financial impact in contrast to a lot of our peer organizations, some of which were dependent 60, 70, 80, 90% on government money, right? A lot of them, Save the Children, laid off 60% of their staff, right? CARE, 80% of their staff. Big, serious players in this space, right? So they're all pulling back, and we're still there, right? They don't have money. They've lost their budgets. When the US government canceled their grants, they no longer could do the work. And their individual donors were not, there was no way that individual donors are going to make up, or even foundations are going to make that up. So as I see the trends coming, it's not clear. I think we're going to see overall child mortality is going to spike. We're going to see a lot more of HIV. We're just going to see many more public health problems. Ebola. Those were just opening acts for what I fear could be coming. So I think we're going to be in a much more of a crisis mode in the next 10 years. And that, sorry, I get really upset when I talk about this, but the pandemic just decimated this sector, right? Because you couldn't bring people together, and a lot of what we do is about bringing people together to talk about whatever it is. And we had just come out of that, right? We had just begun to regain what we had lost during the pandemic. And now the direct impact on our work is, who do we refer on to? So for example, in our early childhood development program, we encounter a sick child. It can't be dealt with at the local community level. The next thing we would do is the local community would refer them to the local health clinic. Well, if the local health clinic has gone away because it doesn't have funding, there's no way to refer people on. So, the demand on the work that the demand and the number of people that are going to be looking for more services because other people have had to step away is going to skyrocket, and it's very troubling.
Yeah, going back like 4 or 5 questions, and something you said at the beginning about evidence-based. Well, I don't remember the phrase used. Evidence-based programming.
Yeah.
EDP. A lot of donors to causes and organizations that effectuate use the money set up KPIs and going back to the question about when do you know you've done your work, do you typically set up and report back on KPIs for any particular initiative? Like,
Absolutely, every single program down
and
at the
are those
village.
visible on your website? Are they published somewhere?
Not at the granular level. We do publish at a sort of a high level.
Well, what you've done, but there's no way
Sure.
someone like us could say, I wonder what's happening. The literacy rate's going up, the mortality rate's going down. Or,
So we have that. We don't put it on our website, but if you wanted to send me an email or somebody wanted to send me an email and dig down into the data and have somebody talk you through the data, that's certainly something that can be done, yeah.
So one of the things we've seen with the big foundations out here in Seattle is the very high requirement of that data return loop.
The
that-
ROI, yeah.
That can be really onerous to organizations, in fact. Are you finding that to be overhead problematic for you guys to have that kind of reporting structure, or difficult even for the people on the ground that you're working through?
I see it as a positive challenge. You know, I want to know that when I show up at the office and go through God knows how many budget meetings, that, you know, the work that we're doing is leading to the outcomes that we intend, right? And so building robust monitoring and evaluation is completely legitimate. It does place a burden on our local partners. There's no question about that. And our local partners, we've had to really, they saw it as they initially experienced it as a policing activity, right? You know, that we were policing them. And we're like, no, the back-end donor needs the data, blah, blah, blah. And then once we sort of flipped it and said, no, this is how you learn to do better. And it's when you add the learning piece of it that it suddenly the light bulb goes off for all of us, that this is actually worth investing in. Because everybody genuinely wants to get better. I won't comment on any particular foundation's requirements. And one of the things I would say to the foundation world writ large is talk to each other and figure out a global standard, because some people need this, other people want that, some people really care about this. And, you know, they've all got their reasons, and it does create a big burden, there's no question. But I do feel that, you know, we as stewards of your donations, you're trusting us, owe you the evidence that we've done what we said we were going to do, and we're making the difference that we want to make.
Could you tell us what percentage of what we give to the diocese goes to your development project?
To the diocese?
What we give, we have an amount of money that we give to the diocese.
Yeah.
And so.
You know, I'm not sure how much, I don't know off the top of my head what the Diocese of Olympia's contribution is to Episcopal Relief and Development. So I don't know the math on that. But I often get asked, and I thought you were going to ask, is what percent of my donor dollar goes to support the program of Episcopal Relief and Development when you send a check to Episcopal Relief and Development? And the answer to that is, from the public, meaning people like you, it's 90 cents out of every donor dollar goes to support the program. I'll tell you that we charge the foundations a higher overhead rate. They're asking us to do a lot heavier lift in terms of reporting, which Dwight alluded to. So if you go to our website or you look at our audited financial statements, I think we're sort of usually in the 16 to 18% is what people call it overhead. I call it the indirect cost rate. But because we are able to subsidize that through foundation grants, and also we get a lot of in-kind support from the Episcopal Church. So for example, we don't have to pay any rent on our office. So that's a huge underwriting that we get from the church for the work that we do. Was that sort of where you were going with your question, sir?
Second question.
Yeah.
What kind of rural development work are you doing in Mexico, Central, and South America?
So we do not currently have much going on in Mexico. However, in Central and South America, we're doing a lot with climate sustainability. So helping local farmers develop strategies that allow them to stay in their local communities. And that's meant to reduce the flow of folks that are coming from that part of the world up to our southern border. So in some cases, it's about drought-resistant seeds. In other places, it's about water management because they've been flooded by rains. It's very contextual. It's very specific to whatever community we're working in. We're working very extensively in the Diocese of Amazonia, for example, which is in Brazil, which is a very remote part of Brazil that, interestingly enough, the Episcopal Church of Brazil actually has a pretty robust presence at, and working there, again, on climate sustainability strategies. That part of the Amazon is being developed aggressively, and that's having a terrible adverse impact on the people who live there. So helping them to develop ways of continuing to live in those communities.
So I'll hand this on to the next question, but I do want to alert you to yellow pieces of paper on your desk and one that Tim has that Georgia signed going back. This, I hope, is for the ERD newsletters that come out. There's a lot going on with you all, and I want to encourage everybody to sign up and see those. I know we have a lot going through our email boxes, but this is interesting, important work, and we're attached to it indirectly and directly. So I encourage you to grab that sheet in front of you there and sign up. And then I'm gonna get to Camille and Soleil, and then I'll come back to you, Marianne.
When I'm listening to you, it reminds me of, are you something similar to the United Good Way in a way? Like you already go to where there's something happening already, and then if it's happening, you keep building it. Could we make that analogy?
Sure, that sounds like a decent analogy. I'm not familiar deeply with how the United Way works, but investing in things that work is generally a strong way of doing this work.
And something's already established,
Exactly.
so then you carry it.
Yeah.
You support it. So how best could we partner with you? I think to Mike's initial question, where we as a parish are doing so much in the world, would we then let you know, hey, we're working with this thing in Haiti or in Jerusalem? Could you, I don't know, just that's kind of where my mind was going.
Sure. I mean, this parish is a very sophisticated parish with its own global networks. You're atypical for churches here in the United States. All right? So I don't want to interfere in what you all are already doing. If you're supporting the American Friends, go to it. They're a great organization. If you found a solid partner in Haiti, go to it. Episcopal Relief and Development doesn't need to help you do that. You're already doing that very well. If you're interested in the kind of work that we're doing in Liberia to reduce violence against women and girls, or the climate resilience work that I was just talking about in Amazonia, then supporting, having your parish or individually supporting Episcopal Relief and Development is very helpful.
And the other piece that I want to add to that is, and just completely encourage us, when there's a disaster, give to these guys, right? What? They're there, and we know them, and yet, but that is something that I know we've done in the past. Absolutely. When there's a disaster, and want to encourage that. Soleil?
Blessings, blessings, blessings. I was looking at one of the pamphlets back there, and they mentioned like prayer is important, and we love prayer as faithful people. And I was wondering, maybe from your 20 years of experience, or just in your own personal life, what are some higher level prayers that maybe we can devote or direct our focus toward, as you would say?
Yeah. Thank you. On our website, we have a whole section that's devoted to congregational resources, which includes a whole variety of prayers that have been specifically written to support the work of Episcopal Relief and Development. My prayer life is a challenging road, so I think everybody has to find that for themselves. I come back to the basic Matthew 25. Right? That's what Jesus tells us to do. Feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, clothe the unclothed. I mean, I don't think it's really actually more complicated than that. And if we overthink it, we're just stalling.
You mentioned the pullback of governmental support for relief and development. So I'm wondering if you see the nonprofit sector itself getting together and doing more coordination?
Hopefully. Everybody currently now is kind of in a state of shock about what's going on. A lot of foundations, I know, are trying to think about how they can step in and fill some of the funding gaps. There's already lots of places where we do coordinate. We're very active as Episcopal Relief and Development in an organization called Interaction, which is the U.S. body that collaborates and coordinates relief and development for U.S.-based organizations. as I said, many of them are on the ropes, right? And they're not in a space where they have yet stabilized and know how they're going to navigate. The foundation world, which I know wants to step up itself, is under siege. We have a member of our board who is on a major foundation who's saying that if the current budget proposal goes through, they're going to tax foundations, and that would cut, he said, nearly $60 million a year out of their funding stream. So, everybody is still trying to figure out, how to navigate their way through this. So hopefully that will come, but it's still early for that to happen.
Eileen, do you have one more? Do you have a question? We'll finish it up with you here This is very important. This is the one question that's going to count.
Last question.
It's the only one we're going to remember. So,
right.
Are you ready for this? Okay, here we go.
I have sort of the opposite of people filling in the blanks. Do the various NGOs ever bump into each other in an area? And how do you mitigate that?
So I will tell you, it is vanishingly rare.
Really?
Yeah, some of that is that we're working in places way beyond the end of the road, at least in our experience, right? That a lot of, we're often, or the church is, as I said, often the only thing present in the communities where we're working. If you go to the big, cities, sure, you'll see all of the big NGOs, World Vision, Habitat. They've all got their offices in Nairobi and other places. And I will see, certainly as I'm driving places, the signs. But they're not using local partners quite the same way that we do. It's not that they don't, it's that they're not using them in the same way we do. So, they're very much headquarters-driven kind of operations, where ours are really grassroots. I mean, we ask all of our partners to be sure that if, some NGO is running the vaccination campaign, sure, get engaged. Be sure the kids in our early childhood development program are being a part of it. But it is even before the big cuts, the geography was not being adequately covered to begin with, unfortunately.
There's a lot of geography out in the world. And we heard a little bit about it in the book of Acts today as Peter spread the good word around the world. And now that infrastructure that those early apostles put their lives into and gave their lives for is we're living into it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important that we do that, right? To continue through our prayers, Sole, right? To remind us that we pray for the world all the time. And to check out the prayers on the ERD website, and also in how we give specifically to ERD or generally through the parish, through Have a Heart, through all the outreach organizations that we touch in Guatemala and Haiti and the Ukraine and the Middle East and all the other places, plus all these things at home we do. So good work, Epiphany. Rob, we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to come to Epiphany for your good work.
My pleasure.
It's a blessing
Here's
to
a
us.
bag of swag to thank you for having me.
Right on, a bag of swag. So peace, blessings, thank you. Let's have a quick prayer to give thanks to God. Holy God, holy and mighty, holy immortal one, for the extraordinary way you have connected us together, right? You made us this way. You are the Trinitarian God. You're the God of relationship, and so we must be in relationship as well, that it may bleed out or move out into all the world through our prayers and through the good works, through ERD, through Rob, through the blessing that he is, and the way in which we share the faith and to share the abundance of our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.